Jason, it's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Nice to see you, Josephine. And I'm happy to join you once again.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
This is our wrap-up episode of COP, so I am going to burden you with so many questions. Please bear with me.
Thank you. I will be able to respond to those that I can be able to respond to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was COP30 what you hoped it would be?
I'm comparing to other COPs, I think COP30 was a little bit better. And I'm saying this because it was hosted in a country where there are more vulnerable people. It's more or less of African COP. It's more or less of people's COP. And because the people of Brazil call themselves the Afro-descendants.
So it is like a people's COP.
A people's COP.
Okay.
Afro-descendants almost face the same challenges like we are facing in Africa in terms of their vulnerabilities. And so they were listened to. You must have heard of the demonstration of the local people in Brazil. They came in and stormed the pavilions and entered through the blue zone up to the presidency, and it was massive.
Did you have a front seat to see all of that happening?
I saw that happen. And it was sending a message, and the message was listened to by the COP presidency, and most of the decisions that were taken were determined by what the people were calling for. And so that's why I thought it was a different COP than the others, though we did not achieve ultimately because at COP, the greatest achievement is the commitment on finances. And if that is not achieved, then you realize you've not been able to achieve what you went for. But the decisions were made.
You said you watched the indigenous communities come in, that demonstration. Can you describe it for me?
Yeah, these are people from the Amazon, and they are heartily touched by the fact that the Amazon forest is being destroyed, and not being destroyed by them, but being destroyed by the so-called investors that are coming from Europe, white-centric people that are coming to destroy the Amazon. And for them, the Amazon is a matter of life, because that's where they think they can get livelihoods, but also the Amazon in terms of controlling the climate conditions of Brazil and the whole of South America. The UN police came in and tried to control the group that was coming in, and it was managed. It was managed, but the message was sent to the presidency.
The message landed.
Yeah.
So you got back on
Saturday last week. That was we ended, I think, on the 20th, 21st. We were here. 22nd.
So then you had a Sunday to rest, and then
I do not even have some time to rest, because I connected through Addis Ababa to Nairobi for another engagement. We were reviewing a project that we were implementing in about 7 countries as OXFAM. So we had brought partners from all over those countries to come and review the progress of the project that we were doing together.
So now,
returning from Nairobi was this last Saturday morning.
So you get back to the office. What does the first week after COP, so for you 2 weeks after COP, what does it look like in the office?
So many questions, definitely from my colleagues, asking what do we get out of this COP? How was it? Did we see anything? But I kept on, posting to the OXFAM email the progress of the discussions. From day one of the engagements, I kept on updating Kampala office on how the negotiations are moving on, the frustrations that we are getting, especially on the adaptation goal.
We're going to get into that.
It was a huge hurdle. Yeah, it was a huge hurdle.
So I want your postcard impressions before we get into the nitty-gritty of COP.
Yeah.
3 memories that are going to stay with you from this COP30.
One memory is the way the Afro-descendants were pushing for recognition. They were saying, why Africa? Why Africa? Because Africa, we requested for a special consideration as Africa. And because of our challenges. So we requested for special consideration in negotiations. And so we had this other group that emerged, claiming to be descendants of Africa. And for me, that will remain on my memory. That we have people there who know they are descendants of Africa. And so because of their descent to Africa, they almost share the same challenges with Africa. And therefore, if African challenges are getting attention, also Afro descendants should get attention. And for me, that was very critical, and it will keep on my memory. The second thing that will keep on my memory is the recognition of the rights of the indigenous people and the voices of the Afro descendants, which became very key. I think for me, the storming of the blue zone by the indigenous people from Brazil, from the Amazon, was amazing. And they send a message that actually their voices need to be heard, that their voice need to be listened to in terms of climate change and environmental management in the whole world.
That's two.
What would be the third one? The third one was my experience in the Amazon. I had to go and visit the Amazon. I think for me that was very key also.
Because they really made their point.
Yes. I had to go to the Amazon to have the feel of this Amazon. What is it? How is this forest? And I realized that the Amazon is at the heart of the Brazilians because they earn a lot of livelihood from the Amazon forest. And it needs to be conserved, it needs to be protected. And so that will remain on my memory. That's the third thing.
Did you see a larger group also want to go to see the Amazon after
Yes,
that?
Yes. Actually, there was a traffic of boats cruising through the Atlantic Ocean to the Amazon River, which also emerges from the Atlantic Ocean. And so going through that river, it was a traffic of boats. Many people from all over the world wanting to access the Amazon.
Okay, so let's get into the main picture of COP.
Yeah.
What were the main outcomes of the Climate Change Summit meeting in general?
About three things that I think we need to give credit as outcomes. One is the tripling of the adaptation finance. They accepted, and the decision was passed that they will triple the adaptation finance. And you see, they agreed to a 1.3 trillion per month. So they agreed to that, and I think for us that was key. So
as you tell me each of these main outcomes, make them useful for me as a Ugandan.
Yeah, and this is very key, because if they triple the adaptation finance, and if that money is realized within the frameworks of the UNCCC, which is this UN body that distributes those funds to the different countries, it means that we as Ugandans possible will also get access to those finances to reach our vulnerable communities. But we are also grateful that Uganda is now co-chairing the Green Climate Fund with Brazil. And for us, that was a take for Uganda, because you can't be the one who is slaughtering a cow and then you don't give your family a big part of that cow. So now that we are co-chairing the Green Climate Fund with Brazil, I know now the fund will reach our country and possibly support the resilience of our communities that are suffering the impacts of climate change. The other take home was the agreement on loss and damage. You know, we didn't have a facility in the first place, but they agreed on a framework to finance loss and damage, because they also have realized that loss and damage is a very key topic that needs to be agreed upon. And so there was an agreed framework on how they will be replenishing the funds for addressing loss and damage. And countries like Uganda now that are faced with a lot of disasters, with a lot of losses in infrastructure because of the climate challenge, in agriculture, we have now the hope that we can possibly be able to access finances that address losses and damages. On energy transition, I think that was also another key point to note, and very important for Uganda. The COP agreed to support clean energy options for developing countries, because we were requesting as Africa for a just energy transition with equity, that will need first of all technology that can support clean energy options, for Africa, for Uganda. If you talk about people transiting from the use of the destruction of for example, forests in the country, then you're looking at clean energy options that will support the protection of the environment, the protection of the major forests in the country. So maybe now solar is going to reach everywhere, and possibly electricity generation will be expanded to make sure that at least every household has access to electricity. But if they don't have access to electricity, they have access to solar that can support them. And for me, I think those three things were key, but also not underrating the passing of the gender action plan. The gender action plan had also dragged a lot in terms of discussion, but this was also concluded, the gender action plan, and Honorable Winnie Matsiko from Uganda is our negotiator on gender. She was also happy. She expressed happiness to make sure to realize that, actually, to see that the gender action plan was agreed upon, and that modalities of implementation were also agreed upon, that finances will be put aside to support the gender implementation in terms of climate change. We've been a part of the negotiation on agriculture, and I was able to interact with the government representatives on agriculture. By the time I reached there, negotiations on agriculture had been closed already. They had been concluded. So which means now we are looking at where are the finances coming to make sure that we support the implementation of agriculture decision at the conference of parties. And in agriculture, we are focusing on water for production. Can money be available to support water for production in especially those areas that are stressed, weather stressed, like Karamoja? They need water for production. But if the finances can be availed to support water for production, I think for us that will be a take.
So that's going back to your tripling adaptation
finances.
Okay, great. Which countries or political groupings came out as clear winners or losers?
I think Africa in general. Africa were winners because there was a hurdle on fossil fuel phase out. The fossil fuel phase out has been championed by the developed countries, that all African countries should phase out fossil fuels. But then the AGN, which is the African group of negotiators, were pushing it back to them, that we want to first see you as developed countries phase out completely so that we can also start phasing out. So for Africa, a failure to come out with a clear roadmap on phase out of fossil fuel was an achievement for Africa, because Africa wants to mine their oil and gas. And they think their mining of oil and gas will propel their socio-economic development. But of course, from the side of us as civil society organizations, we think that that's a hurdle, that's a very big problem, if we cannot appreciate that actually our fossil fuels will contribute to a lot of emissions. And so what are those measures from Africa that we are putting in place to make sure that our oil and gas exploration does not actually increase the emissions? How do we stabilize that? So investment in forestation, investment in conservation, and restoration of places that have been degraded by oil investments.
So I was going to ask you about that. We had over 80 countries backing a roadmap to phase out fossil fuels, but it wasn't even mentioned in the final text.
Yeah.
Do you think that voluntary initiatives like the 2026 Just Transition Conference can fill that gap? Or
I think with time that gap will be filled. Voluntary actions, there are countries that have pledged to phase out fossil fuel by 2035, others by 2030. Brazil is one of them, which made a concrete pledge and submitted a roadmap for fossil fuel phase out, and so that they can invest in just energy transition. And so such countries are there committing themselves voluntarily, but we're also seeing other countries expressing double standards, like Canada. Canada, the president was talking a different language around COP, But when he went back to his country, he was talking a different language. Because at COP, he pledged fossil fuel phase out. His minister of water and environment pledged fossil fuel phase out. But again, in the media, in the next day, we saw the prime minister again speaking to oil and gas investors in Canada. And so we saw that as double standards. You're promising something here, but you're doing another thing different back in your country. So voluntary actions on fossil fuel phase out, I think will help us achieve something. Possibly we shall get there with time. But I think the issue of equity in terms of just energy transition needs to be given priority.
We've been hoping, since we started our conversations on COP, to speak to a government representative. Not much success there, but so this fossil fuel conversation has been one of the contradictions for us. On this podcast, week in, week out, we're speaking about the climate change impacts on Ugandans, from health to agriculture, food security, flood risk, and so on. And yet the Ugandan government was part of the coalition trying to stop the plan to abandon fossil fuels.
Yeah.
What is your view on that?
Even within us as OXFAM, we have a lot of contradiction. We are challenged. Because if you look at OXFAM from the West, from Europe, the language is fossil phase out. Fossil phase out. But for Africa, we decided to develop our own position. Having had consultations with our African leaders, we developed a position as Africa, Oxfam Africa, also working with Pakija and the group of African negotiators. We agreed, yes, fossil fuel phase out is good, but for countries in Africa, we need equity. We need equity. Fossil phase out that does not just come abruptly, because African countries are still looking at how they move out of poverty. And that's why they are calling for increased financing from the developed countries. If you can increase the finances for adaptation, if you can increase the finances for loss and damage in Africa, the African leaders will accept to phase out. But as long as you're not giving us the finances, the only option for African countries to move out of poverty, they say it's exploration of oil and gas. So that's the whole dilemma that we have in this discussion.
What stood out for you throughout all the conversations when you were there? What stood out for you in relation to Uganda?
I think what stood out for me in relation to Uganda was the fact that Uganda is now co-chairing the Green Climate Fund. For us, that's very important and very key. And like I told you, when we are part of the committee, then we can also front the needs of Uganda to be financed by the GCF. And so maybe we'll see more institutions in Uganda accredited the GCF so that they can be able to get the funds directly to finance climate issues in the country. And I think for me that one stood out.
GCF, for my no acronyms listeners.
It is the Green Climate Fund. So the Green Climate Funds basically support adaptation, support green businesses in the country, support environmental conservation. So those are the funds that we are talking about. And if those can be accessed, then they can help us to support conservation of our natural ecosystems. And also that will be providing co-benefits for mitigation, because we want to absorb carbon. And so we can only absorb carbon if we conserve our environment. If we conserve our forests, then we can absorb the carbon. And when we absorb the carbon, we'll be controlling the climate challenge.
Who should we keep our eyes on for accountability?
Again, that is something that we agreed that was not clearly stipulated at COP30. Modalities of accounting were not discussed, and there was no clear decision on accountability. That's a very good question. Who will we go to in terms of accountability? But all hope is not lost, because every year we have what they call the global stocktake. Stocktake is a modality of accountability where you go and tell the conference of parties what are your achievements in terms to how you committed, because all countries are supposed to submit their commitments in form of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And so you go there every year to go and account. Every after 2 years, you go to account on the achievements. How have you been able to achieve this? But also, I think one other thing that they agreed on was that COP, or the developed countries, would support the implementation of NDCs, or national determined contributions for developing countries.
So we had about 121 countries that submitted their nationally determined contributions.
Yeah, but out of a big number, I think, by the time COP started, only about 75 countries had submitted, but by the conclusion of COP, an additional 50 had submitted. That's the 120 something that you are talking about that had submitted their commitments. And so every after 2 years, we go back and explain how far we have been able to achieve our commitments in terms of implementation. But the hope that we have is that there is agreement, again, through the decisions that were taken, that they will support countries to implement these commitments.
We saw for the first time that parties acknowledged overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
How does that change the narrative for Uganda and Africa? Are we preparing for adaptation to overshoot scenarios?
I think, we are, because you can see, of course, even the pronouncements from the president of Uganda. His passion in the conservation of wetlands and forests, that is helping us to achieve, or even to overshoot the 1.5, which is very important and which is very significant. So the passion of the president of Uganda to call on each party, each one and everyone, to protect and conserve the wetlands, to conserve the forests, that is very, very, very key and very important. And I hope the bodies that are in place to support protection of those ecosystems can do their work. For example, NEMA should be able to bite and do what they're supposed to do. The National Forestry Authority should be seen like biting and doing their mandate to protect.
Be seen, should do.
Should do, actually. They should do. And we should see that they're doing. Because if they do, we will see that they're doing. So they should do their mandate.
One of the headline announcements, and you've spoken about it, the tripling of adaptation finance to about $120 billion per year. It sounds big, but there's no baseline, and it's still far below what developing countries need. How do you interpret this? Is it symbolic or is it substantive?
Yeah, those are the hurdles that we see at the conference of parties, and those are, for us as OXFAM, we regard as our failures that we get out of this discussion. Because, you have agreed to tripling the climate finance or the adaptation finance, but you have not told us the sources of financing. Where will this finance be coming from? Is it public finance or private finance? Where is the baseline? And those are the challenges. And so we keep in space, and that affects accountability, because then how do you account? Because you did not create a baseline, and therefore you cannot be able to tell we've been able to achieve ABCD. We have moved from here to there. That is a big challenge. And for us, that was a point where we think we did not achieve much in terms of our commitments. Would have seen a baseline set, would have seen a mention of the source of funding, but that did not come out.
So COP30 also adopted 59 indicators for the global goal on adaptation, but there are some who are saying compromises make them hard to operationalize. From our perspective in Uganda, do these indicators help us measure progress meaningfully?
Yeah. If you read through the indicator, because we had about 100 indicators, and the whole of the 2 weeks they were disagreeing and agreeing. And actually, even agreeing on the 50-something indicators was a compromise of the presidency, because the facilitators and key negotiators from all countries agreed to submit 2 parallel indicators. There was what we call the green list and then the red list. So the red list are these indicators that countries said these ones cannot work for us in our countries. And then especially Africa, they were thinking they thought some of the indicators were not working for Africa.
Give me an example.
What can I say about? I think I cannot be able to pick.
All right, that's fine.
There are so many indicators. So on those, they were submitted to the presidency, and the presidency took its power to agree on what they think are the probable ones that can be taken, and others can remain for further possible work as COPs go on. But at least they agreed on what they thought these are the indicators that we can be able to take forward and agree upon. And for us, that was good, but that was within the mandate of the COP presidency to decide. When you are the presidency, when you are the president of COP, you make a lot of decisions that matter. You either fail or you progress with the people in terms of your decisions. So COP30 being in Brazil, I think was positive for most countries, especially Africa. That's why some of those good decisions were made.
So Brazil launched an open coalition on compliance carbon markets. Could this create opportunities for Uganda, or do you see risks in relying on carbon trading for climate finance?
We have been discussing that in country as we started with government, that the discussion of carbon markets should be inclusive. We want to see grassroots communities involved into the discussion because we risk having dealers getting involved in this business and then it doesn't benefit the people. For example, Josephine, you might be having your 10 acres of indigenous trees, maybe of eucalyptus trees or any other type species of trees. How do you then benefit from the carbon business? So we have farmers that are now doing integration of trees in their farming systems, what we are calling agroecology. How do we ensure that those farmers benefit from the carbon business? So we want involvement of grassroots people in carbon market planning processes so that everybody can benefit from it. Otherwise, it risks to be a business of few people who are investing in mono afforestation. For example, people coming with ideas of investing in eucalyptus as a species of tree, and they basically plant it for business. But also the issues of where they're going to plant it are not streamlined. On whose land are they going to be planting this forest? And if you're not careful, you can have a government that will make deals with those investors, and they will grab land from poor people, and then they invest into forestation actions that benefit them, but also where government possibly gets a lot of money without considering
at the expense
of the grassroots people.
Yeah.
So that's what organizations like OXFAM and other civil society agencies now come to guard against, that there should be involvement of everyone in the planning process in terms of the carbon credit business.
So COP30 saw the largest indigenous presence, and you've spoken about it. Brazil announced 10 new indigenous territories.
Yeah.
What lessons can Uganda draw about integrating indigenous knowledge and rights into climate policy? Are we even doing anything in that regard yet?
We've as a country, we've taken that thematic of indigenous people as a crucial thematic. When we are having our discussions, we also want to bring on board indigenous people, but I think we still have a lot to do. How much do we consult, for example, people in Karamoja to contribute to the discussions around climate change? Yeah, so I think going forward, the indigenous people, the rural communities, are the ones facing the challenge of climate change. First of all, they are poor, and therefore their adaptation capacities are very low. And so they need to be listened to in terms of what they think should be done to support their resilience. So indigenous people will be very key. Their views should be listened to, and they should be integrated in, for example, adaptation planning.
Is this something that OXFAM will participate in?
We are doing that greatly. We have been supporting government, especially when they are doing their reviews of NDCs, because they normally come to us and tell us they don't have money to reach the critical places they would have wanted to reach. And so we come in as OXFAM to complement that. We support the Ministry of Water and Environment to make sure that we consult widely and we reach those vulnerable communities that need to be consulted. And we will continue supporting this greatly.
So the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Simon Steele, I hope I'm saying his name right, he said the climate action agenda is mission critical. Do you think Uganda's civil society and private sector are ready to leverage these voluntary initiatives, or are we still too dependent on formal negotiations?
I think Ugandan civil societies are doing a lot. They are doing a lot to make sure that they even hold government accountable. We know government has committed. Uganda as a country per se has a lot of good climate policies. If you look at our climate change law in Uganda, it's a very good law. If you look at our adaptation plans, the National Adaptation Plan of Action for Uganda is very perfect. It only has a shortfall of financing. The money to implement it are not there.
I've never had us fail on policy.
We do a lot of good policies. I think we have very good technical people that support, but also we are consultative as a country. Yesterday, we were meeting at the Prime Minister's office, again, talking about a food systems transition. And if you look at the framework of the food systems transition in Uganda, it speaks very well. And the reason it speaks very well is because Uganda embraces consultation, that civil society agencies can come and also join with government, and we plan together. And that's why we come up with very good documents. But then the problem is on implementation. And so, back to your question, civil society agencies are committed to the achievement of the mission.
Private sector?
Private sector, that's where we still have a challenge, because private sector is business oriented, it's money oriented. They want to earn interest and profit. That's where we still have, how do we engage with the private sector? And again, the discussion yesterday at OPM in terms of food system transition was, how do we engage with the private sector in this food system transition? Because, for example, the food system transition that we want to call for is a people-centered food systems transition, which appreciates components of environmental protection, that as we are doing farming systems, can we conserve the environment? But how do we also eliminate harmful fertilizers and pesticides in this whole food systems thing? And yet the private sector is a player in the provision of these pesticides. So how do we bring them on board? Because they're making business in fertilizer, they're making business in fertilizer and in pesticide provision. We need now to bring them on board, dialogue together, and discuss what is it that works for our people. Because we are talking about people-centeredness. We are talking about indigenous people appreciation.
Another thing that entered the conversations at COP was trade. So including the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. How might this affect Uganda's exports and industries?
I think Uganda as a country is also conscious about that, because the EU already passed very serious guidelines. And you can already see that Uganda is following those guidelines. For example, coffee trade in the country. There is already a regulation that if you want to invest in coffee development, coffee growing, we will not want to see you going to destroy a forest that you had reserved for a long time for coffee planting. You must make sure that your coffee business, your coffee plantation, coffee value chain is integrating issues of mitigation. that your coffee business is going to contribute to mitigation options and adaptation options. So they are trying to do that. But it might constrain business for countries like Uganda, which are not climate prepared. So it might constrain our business in a way, but I think continuous capacity building of the people that are in the business sector, especially the coffee business and other trade options, that will support us to also be at the level possible of the EU in terms of their needs.
That's very optimistic.
Optimistic. We need to be optimistic in everything that we discuss. Optimism is very good. It's positive.
I've been very selfish with my questions and not focused on OXFAM. So from the perspective of OXFAM Uganda, would you say that your hopes were met?
For OXFAM Uganda, without a clear financing modality, a baseline for finance,
not really.
We don't think we were able to. We met our demands. We appreciate the decisions that were made on adaptation, the decision on gender, the decision on the just energy transition, but without clear modalities of financing, we still have a long way to go, because countries that are underdeveloped, countries that are facing the climate challenge need money. They need finances. And so we'll continue calling for increasing financing as OXFAM to be able to meet this challenge. Yeah, that will continue doing. But also, I think our appreciation of the recognition of the indigenous people, the grassroots communities, I think for us that was an achievement, and we will continue to follow it. That doesn't actually drop from again, future actions of climate action. So making sure that we see grassroots people, indigenous people involved in climate negotiations, in climate change planning processes. So that inclusion is really seen and realized. But greatly, we will continue doing a lot of work to influence institutions that finance climate change. World Bank, African Development Bank, and others. But also in terms of sourcing finances, we are also trying to make sure that we source our independent finances from our country partners, especially countries where OXFAM is resident, and to make sure that the finances can be able to reach the local partners in Uganda who support smallholder farming systems.
The last time you were here, one of the key statements you made was the polluter must pay.
Yeah. It was a huge campaign, again, at COP. It was a huge campaign, and very many people globally joined our campaign. It was a huge campaign. The polluters must pay. And so, again, our push was that there should be a text that speaks to the taxation of the polluting countries. Again, we struggled. That was not in the text. It was not put in the text. Much as they talked about tripling climate finances, but the source was not.
You've said that
was not mentioned. So for us, we would have loved to see a text that speaks about the tax remedies that will be put on these countries that are polluting the environment with their involvement in fossil fuel business.
Well, there's always next year.
Yeah, there's always next year. So COP31.
31, yes. What next now for
pushing
the global process?
We are still hopeful because it was not all lost at COP30. We made some strong strides, and we will continue pushing the agenda.
And for Uganda? For our government, our civil society, is there much scope for them for collaborating in these efforts?
Yes. There were pledges even before we went to COP. Government of Uganda is pledging collaboration with private sector, with civil society actors, to ensure that we address the climate challenge, because it's a huge challenge that you cannot be able to address in isolation. And the government is ready to work with everyone to make sure that that is achieved. Implementation, finances, again, they're saying we need money. And they're also calling on agencies to finance these actions. To finance, for example, the implementation of the NDCs. Private sector should also be able to provide the finances. They're calling on this. And that's what they want to see in terms of collaboration.
It was said at COP that we're not winning, but we're still fighting.
Yeah.
Do you share that optimism, or do you feel that the space for change is still dangerously slow?
It is slow, but we are still hopeful that it will move. It will move. It will move because at least you see that every COP that you go for, there is something that comes out. For example, COP30 has been a good COP per se. We've seen major decisions taken, although limitations on commitments on finance, but at least something has been mentioned. They have agreed to triple the finances. They have agreed to support, for example, NDC implementations. We also saw announcements by the different countries, by the way. They announced money that they have committed to adaptation. About 6 to 7 countries announced finances they will support on adaptation. And for us, that is very important. But we expected more countries to commit. We never saw them commit. Possibly in the next COP, we'll see more.
Some countries were absent.
Some countries were absent, like the United States of America, which is a huge economy, a huge player in this world's economy. So once they don't come and their absence means a lot in terms of our negotiations. We're disappointed again that we did not see the USA.
But you weren't surprised.
But you know that our messages reached because we continued to call on the US government to agree on these issues.
We're closing the podcast now, Jackson. Do you have anything that you'd like to tell us when you reflect on your time at COP and even what's happened after?
Yeah. First of all, myself as a person, having had 4 years without going to COP, this was again igniting my enthusiasm to continue advocating as an advocate, as a climate activist. I really want to see again myself being involved in these discussions because I think they mean a lot. Once I go and I come back and feed into the communities of our country, I think that is also very important, that you go and listen to what is being discussed, you come and tell your people, and then you also plan for the next. And I think for me that is very important and is something that I want to carry on.
Thank you, Jackson.